Welcome to the third of 5 podcasts in the series from Colega Cymru. We've been looking at each of the 5 themes of our policy asks for the next Welsh Government as part of the lead up to the Senedd elections this year. Today we're going to be discussing the third theme, which looks at the entitlement to wellbeing for learners and staff. Before we get into the discussion, we need to do some introductions. I'm Rachel Bowen and I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs here at Colega Cymru. Joining me to discuss today's topic is Colega Cymru Vice Chair and Principal and Chief Executive of Bridgend College, Simon Perrott.
Hello.
Along with Principal and Chief Executive of the College Merthyr Tydfil, Lisa Thomas.
Hello.
Brilliant. So, the theme of today's discussion is the well-being of learners and staff. Colega Cymru is calling for a number of different actions to help make mental and physical health core priorities in the further education sector. A whole college approach will ensure everyone has access to high quality support and that best practice can be shared properly. We want to build an emotionally and physically resilient college community where everyone is encouraged to be physically active and where long-term funding supports this. We're also asking the next Welsh Government to make sure that funding for mental health covers the whole of the education sector, including work-based learning. And lastly, we want to keep the good parts of online learning and working wherever we can in the best interests of learners and staff. To open the discussion then, Simon, there's a lot of good work that we know has gone on at Bridgend College around whole college approaches. Can you tell us why this is important?
Yeah, diolch, Rachel. I think it's really important because we've been going through our process of our new strategic plan. So in my tenure as principal, this is the second one. And in the first strategic plan, I think health and well-being was kind of there. It was if you looked for it. But it wasn't really sort of like front and center. And the other thing that we found is that we felt that we were pretty good as a college when learners and staff had significant issues and problems. So when we were reactive, we were very good at it. But maybe where we were not so good is actually being more proactive and actually thinking about more positive approaches to sort of like health and well-being. So we decided to try and look at a whole college approach, and also to make sure that we included staff in that as well, because we talked a lot, and I think it's about the nature of staff that work in FE. We talk about learners all the time, and sometimes we don't give ourselves as staff the time and the space to consider our needs in terms of health and well-being as well. So we were very keen, I suppose, that to include staff and learners. And I suppose it was a little bit like that analogy when you're on an aeroplane and when they do the safety announcements, they say, put your oxygen mask on first before you help anybody else. And I think the same is true of health and well-being, is that we need to look after ourselves to put ourselves in a better place in order to enable our ability to help others as well. So that was kind of like the philosophy. It was always something that we were very interested in. And in terms of our approach, we decided that we wanted to engage with a whole range of stakeholders, including governors, parents, carers as well, a whole wide range of stakeholders, to look at what does that look like then? What does that actually mean? So it's easy to say, isn't it? We've got a whole college approach, but what does it actually mean? And we also wanted to keep it simple, some very, very simple sort of like messages as well. And the other thing we were very keen on is, again, to move from that reactive approach to trying to help staff and learners to build their own resilience, to be able to deal with challenges. And let's be honest, I think the Health and Safety Executive have identified education as in the top 3 most stressful like jobs. So we know the challenges, and particularly during the current times that we're dealing with. But we wanted to try and help people to not rely on things when things got too much for them, but to be really positive, even if you're feeling pretty good about yourself, for both learners and staff to think about the things that you could do to continue that as well. So basically moving from being reactive to being more proactive, I think, in a nutshell.
I think that's really important. It's not about dealing with problems once they occur. In lots of cases, it's best to try and head those things off. Lisa, do you want to tell us about the approach that Moosa College has been taking to health and well-being?
Yeah, very similar sort of story to that of Bridgend College, really, that mental health and well-being is at the forefront of the college strategic plan. Again, I think in recent years, pre-pandemic, the focus, as Simon has indicated, has been very much about the support services. And they have been predominantly there supporting learners learners have been at the forefront. I think what the pandemic has done, though, in the last 12 months is really drawn attention to the fact that as a college, we needed to be doing more to be supporting our staff as well. And that, when we review our strategic plan annually, that is very much there at the forefront now for the remaining life of the plan and thereafter. I think the funding that Welsh Government has provided, certainly in 2021, and has made a commitment for 2021-22, has been really welcomed, certainly from Merthyr College's perspective, and I know for the wider sector, because what that funding has done is supported not only institutional developments to support mental health and wellbeing for our staff and learners, but also allowed us then to collaborate at a regional level with, and also beyond the region, with our counterparts to look at how we can share best practice and really sort of share what works and what's had a clear impact on individuals within our institutions, and that which other colleges may want to embed within their own support services as well. So I think having that funding has really allowed the sector to move forward. Sort of linked really then to sort of Colegau Cymru's asks is, we've seen a significant increase in demand on our mental health and wellbeing services pre-COVID-19. Over the last 12 months, they have increased significantly again. And we've had to invest significant resource to provide the support that is so desperately needed for learners and staff at this difficult time. I think going forward, though, that that we don't envisage that demand is going to reduce. In fact, we envisage that it is going to continue to grow. So, I support Colegau Cymru's sort of ask really of Welsh Government that going forward, that it does become part of the core funding of FE, because the other thing I think we need to be mindful of as well is, certainly I know in my college, and I know it's the case in a number of others, we have a very, very successful support programme called Inspire to Achieve. And that programme has made a significant impact, positive impact on the college and on learners. But that programme is European funded, and the funding for that programme concludes at the end of next year. So, we want to be able to continue that programme because, as I've said, it's had such a positive impact on our learners and staff. But without the funding, that is going to be a real challenge.
I think there's a really important point there about the fact that lots of European programmes, their funding is certainly up in the air at the moment. That's certainly something that we're keen to pick up and explore further. I think some of the points you've touched on there, Lisa, bring in the next question quite nicely, which is that while there have been lots of really good initiatives from previous Welsh governments, sometimes the approach across the education sector has been a bit disjointed. But sometimes we see a focus on schools, and we don't necessarily see the recognition that young people, for instance, might be studying in a variety of settings. They might be in work-based learning, they might be in colleges as well as schools. And also we've got a number of learners who aren't young at all. We have lots of adult learners. So Lisa, why do you think it's important that Welsh Government make sure that support is provided for learners in whatever settings, educational settings they're in?
It is important that no matter what learning environment a young people find themselves in, that they are supported. It shouldn't be a lottery, depending on which sector you land in, at the quality and availability of support that is there. And I think, there are some good examples of that. So when you look at counselling services that are made available in schools, in colleges, certainly in my college, the college pays directly for any counselling services. And we recognise it's a really invaluable service for our staff and learners, and we've recently expanded that service. So I think it's ensuring that there is that parity And I think you can expand it beyond counselling services as well. You know, if you apply it to the school nurse service that is available in primary and secondary sectors. You know, we've got a sexual health nurse, but again, we pay for that service directly. So I think, like I said, it shouldn't be a lottery as to the services available to you. Depending on the sector you land in, there should be some consistency across all sectors.
Absolutely. And Simon, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Lisa's said there, and it is a big part of Welsh Government agenda. If you look at just the Future Generations Act, for example, it's there and it's driving sort of like policy. We've had some funding specifically for mental health and wellbeing from Welsh Government, which has been very gratefully received by the sector, and we're grateful for that support. And just picking up on Lisa's earlier point is that we have some collaborative work going on. So the colleges in the southeast are working together, the colleges in the southwest and the colleges in the north. There are three collaborative bits going on there. And I think that's really important in terms of the coherence across Wales. We're a small nation of 3 million people. It should be maybe easier for us than maybe some other nations. And I think that's worked really, really well, because that sharing of practice, learning together, finding out how other colleges are doing things is really important. And I think that, you know, with a small nation as well, Welsh Government have the ability to really be able to tune in and listen to the sector. And I think, you know, future policy, that's really important, isn't it? The people that are close to this on the ground, they know the challenges, they know the barriers, and they are very much in tune with what's happening. And if we listen to what they have to say, then that will stand us in good stead in ensuring that we have that coherence across sort of government policy, I think.
Great. And we know that physical health can impact on mental health. You know, that lots of people, when they do some sort of physical activity, whether that's running, yoga, or anything that they enjoy, that supports good mental health. We've seen lots of positive investment in physical activity across the FE sector. Simon, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of physical activity at Bridgend College and why it's important that we think about the long-term funding of initiatives around physical activity and the benefit that has on learners?
They go hand in hand, don't they? If you're feeling good about yourself physically, I know you're an active runner, Rachel. You know this better than most. You actually feel better about your mental well-being as well. And we've had great support from Sport Wales in terms of trying to promote this work. And the other interesting thing is how we measure that and how do we know we're doing well, because it's easy to chase the numbers, isn't it? It's probably easy to get more boys to play football. But actually, if we're looking at being really inclusive about this agenda, sometimes it's not just about increasing the numbers hugely, it's about maybe targeting particular groups. And even if you get a handful in groups that actually may haven't engaged in physical activities like previously, then that's a real result. So there's been an awful lot of work going on across the sector. The Young Ambassador scheme is absolutely fantastic. And we're probably in Bridgend College, we're sort of maybe at the front end of that curve in terms of the work with young ambassadors. But I know, I've seen the work that's happening in Coleg Sir Gar, Coleg Gwent, MPTC Group, Coleg Cambria, to name but a few, Gower. Great work with young people, sort of like working as young ambassadors to increase the physical activity of learners. And that's really important. I mentioned earlier about listening, and sometimes a younger ambassador that actually really understands the barriers that people might feel about taking part in physical activity is really important. I think I might know, but I'm an old bloke who sort of, maybe further away from the 16 to 19-year-old group. And we know from the data that we've got that actually the physical activity dips as people get into their later teens. So we need to try and stop that happening. So more embedding of the Young Ambassador scheme, I think, will really help. And also making sure that we don't just chase numbers, that we're fully inclusive about, because we have had some learners tell us they've had maybe a really poor experience of physical activity in their youth. So to get them involved in something, we found as well not being really dogmatic about you've got to have the right kit. If people want to sort of like kick around with a ball in their jeans at lunchtime or whatever, then let them do it. And let's find those opportunities. We did a very simple thing. I know a number of colleges have done this. We put some outdoor table tennis tables dotted around our campuses. They're used all the time. When we had lots of learners on campus pre-pandemic, obviously. So sometimes it's those simple things that can really get people just doing something. And sometimes it's that first baby step is the one that's the hardest, isn't it? We all know that after we haven't had any physical activity for a while, that first run or that first bit of activity is always the hardest. But once we can get people into good, positive habits, that can have so many benefits in all aspects of their lives.
Lots of food for thought there, from the focus on kind of underrepresented groups, maybe why disadvantaged groups don't engage in physical activity, the need to understand from young people themselves what puts them off, what would encourage them to do things, and some great schemes going on there to encourage people to take part. Lisa, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on at Moosa College on the physical activity side and the sort of successes you've had there?
Yeah, it's just picking up really on a key word, I think that Simon mentioned is inclusivity. I think it's making sure that as colleges that we don't tend to focus just on the learners that are studying sport-related courses or learners that are involved in our sport academies, possibly elite athletes or sportsmen and women that are competing at a higher level. That I think that inclusive aspect is essential so that young people that are joining FE at whether it be 14 or 16 or later, we provide opportunities for them to engage in some sort of physical activity during the week, and that they don't feel intimidated that they have to be competing, be able to perform at a particular level to be able to engage in that activity, and likewise tailoring it to what they want. So I know in Merthyr, we've tailored like a Zumba program for our hairdressing students, because that's when we asked them, well, what type of activity would you like to engage in? That's what they came up with. Likewise, sort of linked to the mental health and wellbeing as well. Yoga was something that was asked for, and we had staff and learners engaging in yoga classes, post 4 p.m. Which was really inspiring to see. So I think the inclusive aspect for me is so important, that we don't just get sidetracked in thinking about our academies, our elite athletes, and that we think about what we can do for all learners.
I agree that inclusivity in so many contexts is what we need to focus on. Last substantive question then, I'll come to you first, Lisa. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed everything in all spheres, but we know that there was already a lot of good work going on in terms of online learning, online delivery, flexible delivery, blended learning. All these kinds of things are going on across the sector already, but obviously we've had to move to using those a lot more. One of the things that we're calling for is to keep the good bits of things over the past 12 months. So we know that, for instance, where lessons have been recorded, then it's easier for people like young carers to be able to play things back in their own time. What are the kinds of things that you'd like to see us keep and do more of in terms of, for both staff and learners, the sort of online focus?
I mean, the pandemic has accelerated the use and application of technology to support teaching and learning. There's been huge investment in devices for learners and staff. There's been huge investment in training for staff to support online delivery. And I suppose that's two really, really good things that have come out of the pandemic. There's not many positives, but they are one. Our digital capability as colleges and as leaders and our staff and learners has shifted diametrically. I think fundamentally our focus, however, needs to remain around the quality of the learner's experience. So I think, what in our planning going forward as part of the COVID recovery, we need to be considering what do learners and staff want? Because without a doubt, there were learners that engaged more working remotely and online than perhaps some have previously done when we were delivering face to face. But likewise, we know through various learner surveys and learner focus groups that we've undertaken remotely during this pandemic, that we know our learners have been desperate to return to college and re-engage with that face-to-face. So I think in shaping what is to come, it's really important that we consult with our learners, with our staff, and we develop something that is mutually agreeable. But I think this, the emphasis needs to be on quality, and being mindful that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. That would certainly be my sort of reflections, and what we do going forward.
Yeah, I think we need to definitely be mindful that what works for some people won't work for everybody. Actually, some people have really flourished in an online environment, whereas others have really missed that kind of face-to-face contact. Same question to you then, Simon. What do you think are the good things that have come out of the focus more on online delivery for both staff and learners? What would you like to see us keep in the future, do more of, that kind of thing?
Well, it was interesting. Before the first lockdown, we were talking about at the college around agile working and how we could be more flexible, both for like staff and learners. And I think what the pandemic has done is that it's just speeded that up. What we achieved as a sector, I think, in a matter of a few weeks was quite incredible when I think about the resourcefulness of staff in delivering online. But as we know, that in all aspects, the pandemic has kind of stretched the gap between those from more affluent backgrounds and all aspects of social disadvantage. The pandemic has hit those groups harder. I was just blown away in the first lockdown last March. Learners were telling me, well, yeah, I can just about get Wi-Fi on my phone, but only if I'm in a local fast food restaurant. They didn't have Wi-Fi at home. Families either not having any devices at all, or maybe one device shared between several members of the household, adults trying to work, and younger members of the family trying to access online learning as well. So again, with fantastic support from Welsh Government, I think all colleges have been brilliant in trying to enable Wi-Fi access, enable devices to get out there. So that's been great. And I think when we go back to some semblance of normality, there will always be an element. We've had some more flexibility. Staff and learners with caring responsibilities really appreciate some of that flexibility that has been brought to it. So that's been really, really good. The other interesting thing, we're talking about physical activity. I've been really amazed at the innovation amongst staff. John Nottingham was our active wellbeing lead. He joined the organisation during the middle of a pandemic, but has still managed to get some activity in joining classes. They're doing warm-ups in front of computer screens or whatever, all kinds of activities, and he's been really creative with that. And again, the interesting bit there is that if you say, okay, for this bit you can turn your camera off, there isn't that stigma that people know that they can't be seen. And you could argue, well, are they actually doing the physical activities? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But actually, it's kind of there's been a lot of creativity, I think, in terms of the approaches to all aspects of education, but also those enrichment activities as well. So I think we would be foolish to throw all that away post-pandemic. There are, although it's been awful and nobody would have wished this on the world, there have been some things that we think, well, actually, maybe that is something that we should include in the future. And it's really interesting, picking up on Lisa's point, there are some groups of learners that have really engaged with online learning, and I might not have thought pre-pandemic those would have been the groups of learners that would have, but what they're telling us, certain groups of learners, well, there's no distractions. Thank you for the laptop and the device that I've got at home now, and I don't have distractions. And the teachers as well are also saying they're engaging a little bit more with learning. Now, that isn't true across the board, because I think we've also got big groups of learners that, my background's in performing arts, and that sort of like social aspect. It's about people, isn't it? And people coming together. So that's been really difficult and challenging both for staff and learners. But I think we just need to reflect on that, because there are some things that the elements of old normal that we want to go back to, but there are some elements that we've learned through this pandemic that maybe we might need to keep in the future as well.
Yeah, I think there's a saying, isn't there, that necessity is the mother of invention, and people have come up with a huge variety of creative and innovative ways to deliver learning, to get people involved in physical activity, and all the sort of, enrichment and enhancement exercises, all without being able to meet up anymore. I think we've covered a lot of really important ground in this podcast, so I'm just going to come to Lisa and then Simon for their final reflections and anything they'd like to add. So Lisa.
I think going forward, I think I would like to see continuation of the collaborative working between colleges. I think in a short period of time, certainly in the Southeast region, in the collaborative bit, I think we've achieved a lot. I think the further funding for next year will allow us to consolidate a lot of that and develop further resources. So I think that's some real positives that have come out of the last 12 months as well.
And Simon, closing reflections from you.
Very similar to Lisa, really. I think that ability to collaborate, if we can't do it around well-being, we've got no chance, have we? Because by its very nature, it's about looking after yourself, but also looking after each other as well. And I think that's true of everybody that's connected with an organization. And also, we've got some really large colleges that are either maybe in the top 3 largest employers in their authority, in their region. So if we can get that right with large numbers of staff and learners that are attending those organizations, there are so many benefits of that going into the community as well. And we talk about colleges being anchor institutions in their community. And I think that's really important, that we collaborate as a sector, but also we look to collaborate maybe via local service boards or other partnerships that we have, to try and work with other organizations as well, and really get that kind of well-being right out into the hearts of our communities.
And I think that a point about collaboration to make a difference to well-being across communities is a really nice place to wrap it up. So it just remains for me to thank Lisa and thank Simon for their contributions today. You can listen to this and other podcasts in the series by visiting our website, colegau.cymru. And on our website, you'll be able to find our Policy Asks documents, lots of further information about our activities for the Senedd election 2021. Hope you've enjoyed listening today. We're keen to hear your thoughts on this topic and all the other topics in our policy platform, so do get in touch. We're also happy for you to share the podcast with colleagues to help promote our messages. But I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks very much.